Okay, let's unpack this. We've got quite a stack of material here, all from The Economist's June 7th, 2025 issue. It covers, well, pretty much everything. Economics, politics, social trends, science, even culture. A real global snapshot.
It really does span the spectrum, doesn't it? Lots of seemingly disconnected topics packed into one issue.
Exactly. And our job, our mission for this deep dive is to sort of navigate through all of it. We want to cut through the noise, pull out the really important bits, the key insights, the surprising facts to help you get quickly up to speed on what's going on, straight from these pages.
Finding the signal in the noise, basically, trying to get to the core of the analyses and the week's developments as presented here.
So think of this as our journey through some of the most significant things happening globally, according to this source material. Ready to jump in?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. Let's kick things off with the big economic picture. The sources highlight quite a few global currents and, well, tensions.
Definitely. And U.S. trade policy is a major focus right at the start.
Yeah, the material mentions Donald Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum specifically. And there's also a note about a pending UK trade deal.
And it's interesting how the sources point out the market reaction. They link comments Trump made back in April about trade to a noticeable drop in the MSCI All-Country World Index.
It really shows how sensitive markets can be, doesn't it? Just rhetoric can have a real impact.
It absolutely can. And it's not just tariffs. The sources also dig into U.S. capital flows. There's quite a discussion about foreign investment in the U.S.
Yeah, and this controversial bit, Section 899 in a draft Treasury bill.
That's the one. As the material describes it, this section would tax foreign income from U.S. assets. Things like interest, dividends, rent.
And the analysis presents both sides of the argument. Some worry it might discourage foreign investment, make the U.S. less attractive.
Right. But the counterargument, as laid out, is that it's a way for the U.S. to get perhaps a fairer share of the money generated within its borders.
There's also a key detail mentioned. U.S. foreign direct investment outflow is actually higher than inflow right now.
Yes, that detail from the source adds another layer to the whole picture. It complicates the narrative about needing only to attract foreign capital.
It certainly does. Okay, moving from trade and investment, energy markets, the sources cover the OPEC Plus June meeting.
And the outcome was extending those production cuts. This has, as the material notes, contributed to oil prices rising since, December 2023?
Yeah. But there's a wrinkle, isn't there?
There is. The material points out that the UAE is apparently planning to increase its own production capacity despite the OPEC Plus quotas.
Which kind of highlights the potential diverging strategies within the group itself, internal dynamics.
Precisely. Now, switching gears quite dramatically, China's economy gets a lot of attention, particularly the property crisis.
Right. The big question posed is it finally bottoming out?
And the picture painted is, mixed. Prices are still falling in some areas, according to the analysis, but there's also significant government support coming in trying to stabilize things.
Still very complex, with huge potential ripple effects globally.
No doubt. And sticking with China, the sources look closely at the electric vehicle market there.
Ah, yes. Described pretty vividly as a race to the bottom. Intense competition, price cuts everywhere.
And this isn't just a domestic issue for China. The material notes the potential for EU tariffs on Chinese EVs.
A clear sign of concern about how that intense competition might impact European car makers.
Exactly. So that gives us a pretty good sense of the economic currents discussed.
Okay, good overview. Let's shift now. Geopolitics, defense, alliances. Another major focus in these pages, starting with Ukraine.
The material presents a view of Ukraine's strategy evolving. It meets a growing reliance on drone warfare,
including those attacks on Russian infrastructure we've been reading about, an adaptation to the long conflict.
Yes, and the human cost. It's just staggering. The sources cite different reports on casualties.
Yeah, the numbers are grim. BBC Media Zona estimate around 50,000 Russian dead. A U.S. estimate cited puts Ukrainian dead also around 50,000, with maybe 80,000 wounded.
Stark numbers. They really underscore the devastating impact of the war.
Definitely. Now, looking at Europe's response, defense efforts are ramping up, according to the material.
Right. Germany's debate about hitting that 2% NATO spending target is highlighted, but also some ongoing issues with readiness.
And Britain's doing a defense review, too. The sources mention targets of 2.5% of GDP by 2030, a budget heading towards $75 billion.
but also challenges. Procurement problems like with the Ajax vehicles and the F-35 program are mentioned as persistent issues.
It all seems framed against that NATO standard, though.
Yeah.
The 2% GDP target and that 20% benchmark for R&D and procurement.
Those targets are clearly driving a lot of the strategic thinking across the alliance as the material outlines it.
Now, the sources also delve into perspectives reportedly coming from Trump world regarding alliances. Important to stress this is reporting on views presented in the source.
Absolutely. According to the analysis we read, the view within Trump's circle is described as seeing NATO as potentially obsolete, and a strong emphasis on allies needing to pay more.
Significantly more. And their view on European integration, as reported, is apparently one of weakness.
Yes, and the material notes support for nationalist movements within Europe, fitting that America First perspective being discussed, again, purely reporting what the source material contains on these views.
Right, just laying out what's in the analysis. It certainly raises questions about future transatlantic ties.
It does. Shifting focus again, the material briefly touches on the conflict in Myanmar.
A complex situation. The junta, the National Unity Government, ethnic armed groups.
And the sources highlight external interests, China's focus on stability for its Belt and Road projects, and Russia's role as a key arms supplier to the junta.
Got it. And finally on this front, tensions involving China. The Shangri-La dialogue gets a mention.
Specifically, the speech by China's defense minister, Dong Jun.
How is it described?
The characterization in the material was that it was, perhaps, less overtly combative in tone than his predecessors.
But the core message.
Still placed blame on the U.S. for regional tensions, as reported, particularly around Taiwan and the South China Sea. That hasn't changed, according to the source.
Okay, that covers the security and political dynamics well. Let's switch gears again. Social trends, demographic puzzles. There's a really fascinating deep dive titled, Phew, It's a Girl.
Yes, this section is quite compelling. It connects the global trend of falling birth rates with something deeply historical. Son preference in many cultures.
And how technology, like ultrasounds, amplified that preference, leading to those missing girl statistics we hear about.
Exactly. The material provides some striking stats showing how sex ratios at birth, that's boys per 100 girls, peaked and are now falling in places like China, India, and Vietnam.
What were those peaks again?
China hit about 120 boys per 100 girls around 2005. India was maybe 112 in 2011, Vietnam similar around 2007. But the key point in the source is these ratios are now dropping back below 110.
So a shift seems to be happening, but the historical preference had real consequences. Why the preference for sons, according to the analysis?
The reasons outlined are familiar, really. Perceived economic benefits, social status, and crucially, old age security, the expectation sons will care for parents.
And the consequences of skewed ratios.
Significant societal imbalances. The material talks about a potential marriage squeeze, too many men finding it hard to find partners, and, disturbingly, increased risks of human trafficking.
It's quite heavy. Does the material offer solutions?
It discusses the complexity. Technology like IVF with genetic diagnosis, PGD, is mentioned. It can allow choice, but the analysis suggests it could also worsen the issue if the underlying cultural preferences aren't addressed, though maybe it helps some families achieve the balance they want without having more kids overall.
And there was that surprising detail from the U.S.
Yes. A really interesting counterpoint highlighted in the material. Studies apparently found that in the U.S., parents with daughters report slightly higher income and happiness levels.
Which is fascinating, given the global narrative often focuses on son preference. Shows how much context matters.
It absolutely does. Different cultural, different economic factors at play.
Okay, moving from demographics to more direct politics and governance, the sources cover quite a bit here too. U.S. domestic politics. First, the New Jersey gubernatorial primary.
Just a brief mention, really, but used to illustrate a point. The continued influence of a Donald Trump endorsement. It highlights how it can significantly boost non-establishment candidates, using someone like Sue Altman as the example discussed.
Got it. And then a much bigger U.S. legal and political story. The Supreme Court arguments on birthright citizenship.
Yes, this is obviously a very significant and sensitive topic. The material carefully presents the arguments being made.
Arguments challenging the traditional interpretation of the 14th Amendment, specifically for children born in the U.S. to undocumented immigrant parents.
Exactly. And the analysis in the source material observes the questioning from the justices, trying to gauge potential leanings. It even points to Justice Alito as a possible swing vote in this specific case.
And the material links this debate to broader issues.
Yes, the report connects it to wider discussions around citizenship and rights, especially in the context of the post-ops landscape regarding abortion rights. It frames it as part of a larger legal trend being discussed. And again, just reporting the analysis found in the source.
Understood. Neutral reporting of the source content. Okay, let's shift south to Mexico. Proposed judicial reform there.
This is a big one discussed in the material. A proposal reportedly coming from the likely winning Morena Party candidate to have Supreme Court justices elected by popular vote.
Elected? How would that even work?
The proposed process described involves things like a lottery system and polling to select candidates, but the material heavily features criticism.
What kind of criticism?
The analysis presented argues strongly that it would destroy judicial independence, essentially politicizing the judiciary. This is framed against the current president's history of conflicts with the courts.
So major concerns about separation of powers, rule of law, as presented in the source analysis.
Very much so. That's the core concern highlighted, again, presenting the content from the source material here.
Right. Okay, quick stops elsewhere. Polish politics.
The material describes the ongoing divide. Prime Minister Tusk's liberal government facing challenges from the PS opposition, which still holds significant support. Persistent polarization seems to be the takeaway.
And Rwanda.
President Kagame's re-election campaign is covered. The analysis aims for balance, acknowledging the country's economic progress, but also raising those concerns often discussed about human rights and his long tenure in power.
Okay, that covers the political map. Now let's dive into science, technology, and how it affects everyday life, as seen in these sources. AI comes up a lot.
It does. In enterprise software, first, the sources look at companies like Salesforce, their Einstein initiatives, lots of competition in that space.
But then there's that really, really cool application. AI reading ancient texts. Dead Sea Scrolls.
Isn't that amazing? Digital archaeology. The material explains how AI isn't just extracting text that's faded or damaged.
It's also helping date the fragments.
Exactly. By analyzing subtle changes in handwriting styles across generations of scribes, as the material describes it, it's like unlocking history with algorithms.
Truly mind-blowing stuff.
Okay.
Back to Earth. Health research, Alzheimer's drug development.
The sources provide an update. It's still a tough field. The report notes the high failure rate for drugs over the years.
But there's a shift happening.
Yes, a shift towards intervening earlier in the disease process. And also, crucially, targeting multiple factors, not just focusing solely on amyloid plaques, which hasn't always panned out.
Makes sense. Okay, zooming out again, space. NASA's budget.
Discussed in the material, yeah. Potential cuts are mentioned for big science missions like Mars Sample Return and the Veritas Venus mission.
And this is happening just as private companies are really taking off.
Precisely. The rise of SpaceX, Blue Origin, and others creates this new dynamic, doesn't it? Competition for funds, different priorities maybe. It's all changing rapidly.
It really is. Energy tech is another area covered. Utilities dealing with solar panels and batteries everywhere.
Distributed energy resources, or DERs, yeah. The material looks at how utilities are adapting and, again, AI's role.
AI managing the grid.
Essentially, yes, helping predict and manage the flow of energy from all these different decentralized sources. The report cites examples like Consolidated Edison using AI for this.
Fascinating. And finally, something closer to home for many of us. Coffee. The health benefits.
Yes. The sources summarize the research. Moderate consumption defined usually as, 2 to 3 cups a day seems linked to reduced risk for several things.
Like what?
Heart disease, stroke, Parkinson's, even depression, according to the studies cited.
But there are caveats, right?
Definitely. Potential downsides at really high doses, and of course people react differently to caffeine. Individual variation is key.
And that practical tip.
Yes, the detail from the report. Adding lots of sugar or cream changes the health equation quite a bit compared to drinking it black. Worth remembering.
Good point. Okay, we've covered the main sections, but the forces had other little interesting bits too, didn't they? More cultural, societal things.
They did, like a point from the letters section connecting falling crime rates, not just to policing, but maybe also urban planning, better policy in general, a broader view.
And that music production thing, the loudness war.
Yeah, dynamic range compression, making everything sound loud, sometimes losing the nuance. A niche, but interesting point. And chess boxing.
Chess boxing, the sport that literally combines chess and boxing rounds. You couldn't make it up.
These little things, plus the variety of book reviews mentioned, biography, tech, economics, science, they just show the sheer breadth of topics the publication touches on.
There was a specific architecture review mentioned.
Yes, focused on sustainable design for warm climates. It highlighted work by African architects and traditional techniques, which sounds really interesting.
And finally, that controversial UK report, Batley Grammar School.
Right. The material briefly covers the report about the incident involving a cartoon of Muhammad. And it touches on the debate that followed, as discussed in the report, concerning freedom of speech versus religious offense. Just noting the source covers this sensitive topic and the discussion around it.
Understood. Purely reporting that the material addresses the report and the related debate.
So, yeah, we have really covered a huge amount of ground, all from this one issue.
We really have. When you step back, we went from global trade intricacies and U.S. tax policy debates to the human cost of war in Ukraine, deep societal shifts in birth rates, complex Supreme Court arguments.
Right down to AI, reading ancient scrolls, the science of coffee, and even chess boxing. It's quite the mix.
It's a reminder of how interconnected everything is, isn't it? But also how specific and, well, human many of these big global stories are when you dig into the details presented in the sources.
Absolutely. From the grand geopolitical shifts down to individual health choices or cultural oddities.
So, thinking about everything we've just unpacked from these sources, what does this collection tell you? Does it highlight the world's complexity, its interconnectedness, or maybe just the sheer range of challenges and, well, interesting developments happening all at once? What part of this deep dive surprised you the most? Something to think about.
Definitely food for thought.